Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Lacini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 30, and my guest is Tom Schreiber. 2019's Gait Brothers Midfielder of the Year. Tom is currently the captain of the Archers Lacrosse Club in the Premier Lacrosse League. He is an East Meadow, New York native who attended St. Anthony's High School and Princeton University. His accolades seem endless, from All-American to two-time Tour-Town finalist to Pro All-Star and MVP. Tom won a gold medal with Team USA in 2018 and was named to the All-World team. He also plays Pro Indoor for the National Lacrosse League Toronto Rock, where he was Rookie of the Year in 2017. Off the pro field and floor, Tom is active in various charities, growing the sport of lacrosse nation and worldwide, and building the PLL. He's a true professional, leader, and I'm stoked to have him on here today. Tom, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's always difficult to listen to the old intro, but I do appreciate all that, and I'm pumped to be on.
Sure thing, man. But before we dive into lacrosse, which I'm sure we will, sports and performance, I want to start out with what you said you're most proud of, which was short and sweet, your family. Can you elaborate on how influential your family has been on you? Go into a little bit more details on your development, career, and your current life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I always overthink questions like that, probably to an extent. But I went that direction for a few reasons. I just kept thinking back on the original question, like what are you most proud of? And I think I'm just proud to be of that crew of people, my immediate family and my extended family. I think I've been extraordinarily fortunate in a lot of ways. Sacrifices my parents made when I was a kid. I've a few cousins that have really helped me out, my aunts and uncles on both sides. I'm just proud to be from a really tight-knit family and one that truly cares. And I think the older I get, the more I kind of realize that you can take your life in a number of different directions. And I think my immediate family, my extended family, really all of them has chosen to focus on their kids and their family. And I think being of that flock is something that I'm really proud of. And believe it or not, I think we're the same age, if not, I think you may be a year or two younger. But we're getting close to that time where it's we're gonna have families of our own, and it's an exciting sort of thing. I feel like I've had really good role models in that world, and I think everything kind of starts there. So that's why I went that direction, and I think they've all had a pretty big influence on me, whether it's on the field or off.
Tom, I love the answer. And the reason why I asked it as the number one question is because I think it goes under the radar, your closest relationships in terms of how it correlates with your performance. But I think if any great athlete looks back at what was going on in their life on those times where they were getting injured or hurt or, playing in second or third gear, I think you'd find that their relationships were off kilter and their mind was elsewhere. That's kind of why I want to ask it, because, I think it's really potent if you see, a great athlete performing at their highest. They probably have those relationships in order, and they're solely focused on their job on the field. For years, you've been in the conversation as one of the top players, if not the top player in the world. The question I want to ask you is, what other factors do you believe goes into your sustained success? What would you point to for your longevity at the top?
I think just, kind of the constant, need to add new layers. That's always been kind of my approach, from a pretty young age, is to, add something new to your game. I think there's a few different ways to, in lacrosse in particular, because, I'm sure it applies to other sports, but lacrosse is probably what I know best. And, there's a few different ways to approach your skill set. And I think there are guys who can be hey, I'm like a shooter and that's what I do and I'm going to be great at it. The approach that I've taken is I just want to be as difficult to cover, as difficult to game plan for as possible. And if that means being able to go right-handed, left-handed, if that means like being able to run by somebody or try to be a little more physical or be like a little more crafty and creative, I want to try to do that. And, that was probably part of the influence, in some respect as to why I chose to dive into the box lacrosse world and, ended up ironically loving that game, just as much as the field game. It kind of started as like a way to, improve my field game, but it ended up being something that was really cool on its own 2 feet. But I think, kind of constantly being a student of the game is something that's like been kind of a core value as to how I approach my athletic career, always. And, I've, again, going back to my family, like I've had, I've talked about my dad a ton over the years, my cousin, Scott, who's a little older than me, but has been like a major influence in my life and both of them have like constantly been like, hey, look at this crossover in the NBA. And like, this is how you can kind of apply it as a split dodge and things like that. So I think just like constantly trying to improve and improve on things that, are not rooted in like a goal that's, somewhat manufactured. And what I mean by that is like, if you win some award or didn't win some award, like your performance is the same, for that year regardless. And I think you kind of have to look at your body of work in that way, and just like improve on the things that you want to improve on versus, kind of looking back and being like, oh, like I was great this year,
Yeah.
So I'd probably point to that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's evident, Tom. It's definitely evident, and I think that versatility really shines in your game. Something that it provoked in my mind was, as a short stick defensive midfielder, if I'm watching film on my matchup for the next day, I don't even mind going to the high school film, right? Because when things get to the pressure situation, they might go to that split rollback or a specific move they've always done because that's where they're most comfortable. So I love how you're talking about adding layers because that's something that I'm directly looking for. Where are they going to go for on the field at a specific spot? You played at the highest level seemingly since high school, at St. Anthony's and then Princeton, et cetera, all the way to professional level and Team USA. Going kind of a question, which is like your strategy inside the process you just gave us, putting layers to your game. If you were to talk specifically about Tom Schreiber's game, about what's the same and what's different, could you be specific for a listener that's really into lacrosse and wants to develop their game as well?
Yeah, I'd say the kind of consistent part of my games I've always like kind of like fed the ball. Like I've always distributed from the midfield, which, I think was, I don't understand actually why more midfielders don't. I feel like it's like kind of easy to see the field from up top and it's just kind of, you see so much like distributing from X and defenses are kind of designed to stop that, and they slide really well from behind and, defenses slide great from everywhere at this point, but, I think you don't really see a ton of guys feeding from the midfield. So I think that's been pretty consistent, since I was back at St. Anthony's. I've always, kind of focused on that. I've always focused on, being able to get the ball out of my stick quickly over, having like a ton of whip in my stick and get my hands way back. And that's kind of how I approach training with, the next generation of guys too. Like I love the skill development stuff. I don't know if I have the bug to coach. Maybe I will, after I'm done playing, but for now, I really enjoy the skill development piece. And, I'm a big believer in, there's kind of like an individual fit, for each guy. And for me, it was, I kind of have like alligator arms still and just try to get the ball out fast. I always use like a really tight pocket where, I prioritize kind of quickness over, like I said before, get my hands way back. So I'd say like that quick release and, feeding the ball, distributing the ball are two kind of constants. And, as I've gotten a little older and, continued to hopefully develop a little bit, I think, box lacrosse has definitely changed my game a little bit in terms of like kind of how I use my body, how I finish the ball, things like that. But I'd say, since I was young, like there was always kind of a focus on being able to to score and feed and get the ball out of my stick quick, whether it was a pass or a shot.
Love it. Thank you. What I want to go to is the skill development and training side of things. As a coach, when you're working with your elite group or whoever it might be, specifically to you, what kind of things do you focus on now in your training that maybe you neglected or maybe you didn't do as much of as a younger athlete?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good point. I think I do a lot of that, and I, didn't necessarily like do it on purpose, but it was like, oh, I wish I did more of this. And I think it's that the game, in my opinion, is kind of shifting more to like a wing dodging, like 2-man game, get your stick to the inside sort of style of offense versus like, alley dodges, getting it through X and like getting to the backside, right? There's still an element of that, but I think there's a lot more, focus on getting to the middle of the field. Like, your team does it, better than anyone with, the personnel that you guys have. And, your, shot percentage goes up tenfold. I'm sure there's some stat out there. But, just the angle of your stick, shooting on goalies and, as like the level of play rises, not only at the professional level, but with more people playing lacrosse across the country, and really the world, I think, that's one of those things that, is more prevalent in today's game. So I try to focus a lot on that. I try to get, put players in positions where they understand how to get to the middle, understand where slides would be coming from, where their outlets are. I think that's like younger players kind of get in trouble, right? You see guys who are super athletic and can get to the goal and just work on shooting. And it's great, but like if you see them in a game setting, they don't understand how to get the ball out of their stick and where that ball should go. So I try to work in some of that lacrosse IQ that seems so elusive for so many players. So I try to kind of train that in addition to all the good stuff, all the like dodging, shooting, and all that stuff. But try to make it a little bit more all encompassing when I can.
Love it. You kind of took my next question right there because you have many young lacrosse players and student athletes that look up to you, Tom. So I kind of wanted to ask you the question, if there's a recruit listening to this, what kind of things should they focus on, develop specifically? Because I think you already touched upon, everybody wants to bomb the ball. Everybody wants to shoot the ball hard. But specifically, like even in indoor, you don't see that, bombing the ball. It's everything's much more tactical. So maybe we could shift the question to what these athletes should focus on being, right? Whether it's more resilient, whether it's better teammate, so what comes out in your mind when I ask you, what should a recruit focus on most if they really want to get to the next level?
I think where things start, and I think it's like easy to dismiss this as like coach speak or like cliche, but like, the best advice I could give, kind of across the board, is, kind of controlling the things you can control, right? Like, and that it starts with that, right? So it's like your attitude and your effort, and how you carry yourself. That all that is like completely within your control. And if you don't have those couple boxes checked, that's a red flag, I think, in the mind of a college coach. Like, I can't speak for those guys, and I'm sure there are some guys where talent probably trumps that, but there's probably under 10 guys across the country who could get away with that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, these college coaches are recruiting guys that are going to go be on campus for 4 years. And they want the right people, and the word that stuck out in your question was resilient. I try to tell people all the time, like, college lacrosse is really hard, and it's not all that fun all the time. It's really not, and whether you're winning the national championship or, your team is 0-10, there are going to be days where it's really tough and it's not fun at all. And you need guys who will be able to withstand that. And it's so different, I think, especially in today's like kind of club lacrosse model, where it's like, yeah, you go and play these like 40-minute games on like a small field and then go play another game. And, it's all about getting recruited and whatnot. And, it's not like a criticism of like the club world or anything. Like, those guys do a great job of, prepping guys for the next level. But at the end of the day, like the mental side of it, if I'm a college coach, I want a guy who, can withstand that and can be resilient and can continue to show up every day regardless of what's going on, and continue to work hard and continue to kind of be a positive force for their team, whether they're a defenseman, attacking, fogo, goalie, whatever, and the best player on the field, an okay player. They want someone who's going to contribute to their team and their culture. And I think it starts with that sort of thing. And then beyond that, I think, once you have that stuff squared away, I think you need competitors, you need guys who can, I'm sure you went through it. I know we did at Princeton, like the tournament, coincides with like finals and like your thesis, and like that stuff is just a lot to handle. And, it's crazy to think that, but you kind of have to look at these 17-year-old kids and kind of project like, okay, does he have, kind of the toughness and the grit and like the dedication to be able to balance both of those things and still contribute to your team, and I think that's consistent across the board. So I think like that stuff we went over a little bit earlier with like the way offense is shifting, like I would try to get your stick to the inside and like add layers to your game and be crafty and be physical and try to have both hands. But I think it starts with, that kind of attitude and that resiliency that you touched on in the question.
Yeah, what's resonating in my mind, Tom, is how you said, continue to add layers to your game. I think, that really means be coachable. That really means have, this open mind that you can develop your game. You never arrive. Some of the things, I think your foundational answer there, controlling the controllables, sums it all up, right? Because right when you have that kind of right attitude, you can work with that. I think if you asked any business professional, the level of their success or failure is dependent upon if they have the right people, right? And when a pressure situation arises as a culture, right, whether it's a 1-goal game in lacrosse or it's a meeting you must close, do you have the right people in that meeting room or on the field? Lacrosse is obviously such a big part of your life, my life. You're traveling for it, you're training, even though you're not specifically a coach for one team, you're coaching all over the country. You're a pro player in 2 leagues. How do you find balance, Tom? Is there a balance? Do you ever feel overwhelmed by lacrosse? And what do you do on those times that you perhaps get overwhelmed?
Yeah, I'd say that one's still a moving target for me. I've been trying to figure out, the perfect balance of all that stuff for quite a while. I think it's a very good problem to have. Like, I have a lot of cool opportunities and a lot of things I'm passionate about, and I'm sure you dealt with it too. Coming out of the Ivy League, like there's certain like expectations and like there's like a pretty clear career track that most guys take, and I made a pretty conscious decision, right after school that I was going to prioritize lacrosse, and the definition of like prioritize kind of doesn't necessarily mean I'm only playing and not doing anything else. It just kind of means like, I'm not going to miss a training session or workout or like show up late to, a game or something because of something else. And that's kind of how I've defined it. And then I've been able to kind of carve out my life from there. But that was kind of the starting point. And, the like training coaching world has coincided pretty well with that. And then where I really got lucky, because I've always kind of had this like self-consciousness around like, hey, like I'm keenly aware that like there's an expiration date on my ability to play this game. Am I setting myself up to transition into something else if I want at the end of my career? And it's funny, you see like high level athletes, NFL, NBA guys, NHL, whatever it is, guys who are making a hell of a lot more money than us playing the game struggle with that. And they have, the cushion to be able to handle it. But, for folks like us, like I'm going to stop playing lacrosse and then I'm going to kind of need to figure out that next step. And, have for a while was like, pretty antsy about, am I doing the right thing? Like, am I building a career? Am I building a skill set? Am I going to be okay when, my time's up as a player? And where I got really lucky with that is the PLL. What better opportunity to kind of have a role somewhere that understands that, you're going to focus on lacrosse, and to kind of see a business go from an idea to where it is today, and to have a role in that and get that experience, and be able to, quite literally like build something that you're super passionate about with people that you looked up to, and, as a kid and as a young player is pretty special. So I definitely got lucky there. But going back to your original question, it's like, I love the coaching, I love playing, and I love, helping to build the PLL. And it's, at times, like, it's really tough to, distribute your time, in addition to that, wanting to like have somewhat of a life, and having to like really train. And that, like, the physical training it takes to get ready to play, and, being on the road, there's just like a lot that goes into it. So that's why I would say it's a moving target. I certainly haven't perfected it, but feel I'm in a pretty good place. And it comes back to like the old like time management thing that you hear so much about in college. So
Yeah.
Still working on it, but feel pretty good about being able to kind of check all the boxes and do well with them all.
I will say, and I don't think there will be a day when it stops being a moving target. I had Brody Merrill on my webinar yesterday, and something that he talked about is something our Navy SEAL character coach gave us on the San Diego SEALs was, there's an operational cadence and rhythm to life, right? And Brody brought in his example is sometimes I just need that Saturday Night Live, right? Just to kind of regroup, right? And I really think, it is more rhythmic rather than, a hard, fast line. Something you said about your opportunity with the PLL is that, luck fell into plate. I don't think so, Tom. I think you were prepared for the opportunity, and you've been working for a long way to have that. But I love how you brought up that you're keenly aware about the future, right? And it's so important for athletes. Right now in my graduate course, I'm taking a career transition, and I'm looking at the numbers of different NBA players, NFL players, people that just weren't ready, right? And it's kind of like when they retire, when they move on, it's like this mask gets lifted and everybody sees who they are, rather than marrying what you do to whatever your game is you play. Don't confuse that with who you are as much as you're signing autographs, doing media stuff. And I think that was really cool to see that you have that kind of awareness. You brought in physical training in your last answer. So nowadays, like many high school athletes are aware of the importance of like strength and conditioning. I was speaking to Boyd Epley, who was perhaps one of the first strength and conditioning coaches in America at Nebraska, and he came in the late 1960s. So up until the 1950s and 1960s, we weren't physically training. There was nothing like that. What kind of advanced training techniques do you focus on now, Tom, that may become commonplace in the future years, whether that be recovery-oriented, nutrition-oriented, sleep, whatever comes to mind for you? But strength and conditioning took a long way to say that a muscle-bound player is actually a good thing. What do you think is next?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And it's funny, that's one of those, I guess you'd call it an industry where there's so many different opinions, and it's like pretty impossible to, reach a conclusion as to what's best. And it kind of ties back into what I was saying before about like kind of an individual fit for a lot of athletes. And I think there's a lot of power in figuring out what works for you. My cousin Scott, who I had mentioned before, not only was he there for me, mentally, but like really like trained me up in high school, throughout college, my first few years in pro, and has always kind of had this, more like, there's certainly like a training piece, but there's also like a taking care of your body piece. And, I've that's always stuck with me. And since, we were joking about it before, but I'm now a Jersey boy here in Hoboken. And since moving, have, hooked up with, I got to give him a shout out, Sal Marinello, who's just been all about movement. I think you look at, Lyle Thompson is just somebody to look up to in so many different ways. But if you see like what he's doing, with his movement training and how fluid he is with that kettlebell, I could even begin to do what he's doing, but I would like to one day.
Right.
But I think like that's next. Figuring out how your body can move most efficiently, And in our world, being able to recover quickly and to be pretty fluid. And I think that stuff is huge. And there are a number of different ways to kind of get there, but I think that's really next. I think like so much of training has been kind of dictated by like the bodybuilder movement, and just getting, as jacked as possible. But, I'm 29. I'm getting up there. So I'm trying at this point, I'm after performance. I want to play at the highest level that I can. And, in order to play at the highest level, you have to be injury free and kind of ache and pain free. And for me, I think like a lot of this movement stuff and a lot of recovery is really important, especially when the world returns to normal. And, guys like you and I are in season 11 months out of the year. So I would say COVID's presented a pretty unique opportunity for us, being able to like really train, which has been fun, getting like clanking the weights around a little bit more and like getting after it a bit more. But I'd say as the world, kind of returns, and we're coming up on, 2 weeks, and we'll go PLL till mid-September, and then, ramp up the NLL in probably November for training camp. Right. I think pretty much from there on, it's going to be, definitely pushing myself as hard as I can, but doing it in a way that will, kind of prevent injury and allow me to kind of perform as high of a level as I can. And I think a lot of that is that movement work over like heavy weightlifting.
Yeah, I think performance, movement, the individual fit is really sticking out in your answer. I mean, before we could talk about durability and versatility, how about availability, right? And I think that's like the number one thing. I love your awareness in the last couple of answers, Tom. I think it's the number one element to excellence, just having that kind of keen awareness. One of the thoughts you provoked on physical training, a good friend, Bill Parisi, who started Parisi Speed School, has moved his work towards fascia, right? If you looked at Saquon Barkley versus Kevin Durant, one is more muscle bound and one's more of a fascia athlete. And it's more like saran wrap around your muscles, if you could picture that, that's activated by these synapses that fire, right? But there was no way that Kevin Durant should ever look to lift the same way Saquon Barkley does, setting all those records at Penn State. So it's kind of that goes under the hood of individual fit. Are you a fascia athlete or are you more muscle bound? And kind of knowing what works for you is best there. One of the things you've continued to bring up is your father, Scott. There's such an importance on modeling and mentorship. Who were perhaps it was just Scott and your father, but who were some of your earliest mentors, coaches, and role models that you looked up to develop your game?
Yeah, I mean, I think those two stick out pretty immediately. I've definitely like said this a ton of times, but my dad is just like in my life as a coach, and obviously a father for so long. And I think I draw a lot of, influence from him. And, he goes back to that first answer, like, his whole life was about me and my sister, from the day we were born until now, and never really had much outside of that. And I think that was something I wasn't like really aware of until I got a little older and, realized just how much time him and my mom, like, kind of running us around all over the place, and, them working at, 6 a.m. and, coming home and taking us to practice, taking us here and, making dinner and all that stuff. And, that stuff was pretty cool for me. And my cousin Scott, like I had said, is more like a big brother type of person. And, and I know he does that for a lot of athletes now, with his business on Long Island. And he's, equally as great of a trainer as he is just like kind of a mentor and like someone to kind of confide in, and which has been huge for me. And one of the things I try to in this day and age, like kind of try to tell kids and try to implement in my own life, it's like, I would caution against, kind of treating people you don't know as mentors, but I think like looking at ideas and values as like there's probably a better way of articulating it, but like as your mentor, like ideas, like a good book, that can like help guide you, and you can kind of fall back on those principles to help you out and things like that. But I do think it is important. You made this point earlier, just like to have the right support system around, have the right people in the room, and spend time with people who are going to like, make you better, and like you'll make them better. Like those are the sorts of relationships that I think are lasting and the ones that are really valuable.
I think you bring up such great points there. I love how we talked about moving target earlier, whether that be like what kind of schedule you look like. But when it comes to your relationships, and I think you're talking about your father, your mother, Scott, it's so nice to have those constants in your life, right? With everything like the inconsistencies and the moving schedules and stuff like that, it's so nice to have those. I bring this quote up all the time, but probably one of the most best motivational speakers, Jim Rome, used to say, every day stand guard at the door of your mind. And I think that's important, right? What are you letting in? What are you listening to? What are you reading? Who are you allowing to influence you, right? The easiest way to change your life is to change your inner circle. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. These type of things, I think, get lost, right? And if you're not okay with where you're at, it's probably because of you're surrounded by anchors, not wind, right? So I think it's important. I don't want to drive it home too much, but it's really important to me that the relationship aspect, as I think you've dedicated your gratitude and you're showing that I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for these people and these people kind of uplifting me. You said it earlier, adding new layers, but one of the obvious qualities you have, Tom, is that open and growth mindset, right? And you brought up, what are you reading, books? So I want to ask you specifically, what kind of books, resources, podcasts do you turn to or have turned to that helped you along your way?
Yeah, no, and I think just to rewind quickly, like I think, having those like human beings, one, like it's like a real, privilege and something like I'm fortunate to have. But I would say like, if you don't have that, there are ways I think to kind of, fill that. And I think it takes like a kind of a proactive mindset. And it's not like networking, I hate that term, it's just like empty, like corporate term. And it's just like not authentic at all. But I think finding people that, if you're an athlete, if it's a coach or like even a captain, somebody like that, does all the things that you mentioned, like uplifts you and like kind of makes you better. And you kind of have that two-way street sort of relationship. And I think, whether or not you call that person a formal mentor or, it doesn't have to be that, but if it's somebody that you can kind of lean on, I think that stuff is really important. And, it segues into what you just asked. Like you can draw inspiration, you can, lean on ideas and, podcasts and things like that. And, for me, I've always liked the stoicism stuff. I know it's like blended into the mainstream a little bit more. And, in some ways it's kind of like been dumbed down, for the masses a little bit, but, that stuff has always made a lot of sense, just like kind of like this ancient idea of just like controlling what you can control. And, you can't control what happens, but you can kind of control how you react to it. And I think that it's so simple, but I think, applying that, in even like small situations, I think is something that's really helpful, even like in traffic or something. It's like, well, I'm going to be 15 minutes late. I'm not going to return Mark's text for 5 hours because I'm driving. But if it's not something you can control, but you can kind of control like how you react, and you can kind of control where you go from there. Same thing with like a bad game, or COVID, right? Like, hey, like your season's over. What are you going to do to get better in the next couple of weeks? Like you can't go outside for 6 weeks. Like that's out of your control. Like it's been like such an odd time, such a unique time for all of us. But I think like it's the definition of something that you can't individually control. You could do the right things and like follow the guidelines, obviously, and all that, and contribute in that way. But, it kind of robbed a lot of us of our time, but it was also like, if you look at it less as a disadvantage and more as an opportunity, I think that will lead to a lot more success and kind of fulfillment. And for me, I remember the PLL kind of asked us to go through something like we were thankful for, right in the middle of the pandemic. And for me, it was like, my girlfriend at the time, or maybe fiance, I don't know what stage we were at, but we were long distance for like 7 years. And then, we moved in together for the first time, and then the pandemic hit. And we just got to spend all this time together. And it was like, I think I'm going to look back one day and like really miss the fact that we got to have breakfast together every day for 6 months straight or whatever. So I think like shifting your mindset from like, this is a challenge or this is a problem to this is an opportunity, and like controlling how you react, I think is something that's like pretty applicable regardless of the situation and regardless of like what's at stake and the weight of those challenges or opportunities.
Such a phenomenal answer, Tom. I think this whole pandemic could be summarized. Are you going to use this time to get bitter or get better? Right. I think I might be alone in thinking this, but I think the ancient stoicism is the modern day mental game, right? Because I don't see too much of a difference. It's all about controlling the controllables. I love that you used the traffic example. This kind of word mindfulness is a really big buzzword, but not everybody knows what it's about. And it's mindfulness, really short and sweet, is emotions are good to have, but you are not your emotions, right? When somebody cuts you off, yes, you're angry, but is that who you are? No, right? So I think it's important to focus on the response, just like you were talking about it. It's so cool to see that you're such an advocate of stoicism, of the mental game. And then you finish with gratitude, right? Which is what this podcast is all about. And I heard this quote by Tony Robbins that said, change your expectation to appreciation and your whole life will change. And I think that was huge. And I think you definitely will, Tom, look back at these kind of like micro moments, right? Where it's just a simple breakfast with your wife, which is huge. I think I know the first part of this next question, but I want to do hero, highlight, and hardship with you. Who's somebody that and we can do lacrosse specifically, right? So who's somebody in the game of lacrosse that's been a hero for you or you looked up to? It could be one or two people if you want, maybe even three. A highlight or two, and then a hardship that you've had to work through and perhaps made you better in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'd go Matt Schreiber first, mainly because, and I don't interact with, I probably haven't talked to him in 2021. And probably once or twice in 2020, but he's just someone I like really, really admire, like how they carry themselves. Like he's somebody that every time you're around him, like you can't help but have a smile on, and you can't help but, want to better yourself. And I think he has like this uncanny ability to do that. And again, I'm not even, I feel like if I saw him right now, like we would pick up, like, we never left, but like I haven't, chatted with him in quite a while, but he's just someone I really, really admire and really, really look up to. And then the other is somebody I talk to every day, and that's Kyle Harrison. Like I just, I looked up to him as a player when I was coming up. Like I had the K18 arm pads and all that stuff. And, but now, I've had the opportunity to kind of work with him on a number of different things. And I was teammates with him with the Ohio Machine for a few years. And he's just like somebody who did all the right things for me when I was a rookie, and brought me along, like brought me like to go like grab coffee with him and like his existing friends on the team, and like went like out of his way to go and do things like that. And that, like, those like little things meant the world to me. And then, on less of a personal note and just more on like how Kyle carries himself as a leader and as a human being. And, he's a family man. He's, a leader in so many different ways. And he's just somebody that, I continue to kind of strive to be like. And, I think it's no coincidence that he's, one of the most respected guys out there. And, I'm lucky to have that tight relationship with. And I think the next one was highlight. Is that just like a highlight of the lacrosse career sort of thing?
Yes.
Gotcha. So I mean, I think I'd be hard pressed not to say that the world championship, you know, and it was less about, and I really do mean this, like, this isn't like trying to sound like cool or something. Like, it was less about like the result and more just about like the full on experience beginning to end, like seeing that team come completely together and like going, you know, we stayed in this crazy place in Israel and, you know, had all these like great moments together the whole time. And, you know, you're there for 3 weeks and it was, ate a whole bunch of hummus and like some good meals on top of that too. But it was just a really cool experience, and like to kind of go out, you know, on top the way we did. And, you know, it was in a lot of ways like a pretty, dreamlike, like picture perfect moment. You know, I was like halfway across the world with USA on my chest, and, you know, we won the gold and everyone's families were there. And, you know, the celebration, game was at like 10 a.m. local time. So it was like kind of a weird situation. And we, you know, went to this Irish bar and restaurant in Israel, which was like a weird experience in and of itself. But like, it was just our families, and the team. And it was very cool. It was like a moment in time. Just like, I remember I sat down in like this booth, that kind of overlooked everything that was going on. It was the first time that, you know, especially after the way that game ended up, I thought they were going to, you know, call us back to the field until I landed back at JFK to finish the game. So I like never like really relaxed. But I remember looking around, it was the first time that I'd sat and like was by myself and not just like, you know, like celebrating and all that stuff, and just saw like so many people just with their families and like huge smiles on their face. And it was just like this culmination of, you could tell like all this hard work and all this like, dedication and sacrifice, which we've talked about at this point a couple times. But that, you know, maybe that moment, you know, more than like the game itself was like, was worth it all. It was pretty cool. And hardship wise, I'd say like I'm like very lucky that I've had, you know, a pretty smooth life in the grand scheme of things. Like, I think we've all dealt with different things, and, you know, family members, you know, moving on, and people getting sick. And, you know, personally, I've been like pretty lucky, with all that stuff. I've had a couple like injuries, in, you know, playing lacrosse. So I think I'm lucky to say that that's, you know, really probably the hardship in my, career. But I think, you know, it is, you know, for most people like that dedicate so much of their life to their sport. And I talk to kids about this all the time. Like, it is like, it's okay to be like pretty devastated by like a season ending injury, like after you spend so much time on something. But it kind of ties back into, you know, that stoicism stuff. It's like, I wrote my college essay on, you know, how like I broke my ankle right in the middle of getting recruited. I broke my ankle playing football, and it was like October of my junior year. I remember I had to like cancel a couple of visits, and it was like pretty nerve wracking, to get recruited. But, you know, I wrote my college essay on like that time, like away from sports, allowed me to kind of like explore some other things. And, you know, for the first time in my life, like I kind of enjoyed, learning some new stuff and reading and spending some time with like my friends, and like had this like opportunity where like it wasn't just sports. You know, I was able to like focus on some other stuff and enjoy my time. And, you know, ended up at the end of the day, you know, kind of a changed person. You know, when I came back and was able to play again, it was, you know, kind of a different approach. You know, I wasn't just all about sports, but I was like about sports, school, my friends. And like, it allowed me to like grow up. And without that pause, without that injury, I don't know, if that would have happened. So, I don't know how good that essay turned out, but that's what I wrote about. And I do remember that, you know, that was like my first major injury, and I've had a couple in the pros, and I've tried to kind of take that same approach. It's like, I have a lot more time. You know, I remember getting hurt, in indoor and missed like 8 weeks, and was able to like go to somebody's wedding, which like I'm not going to be able to go to too many weddings in the next couple of years. And, I felt kind of fortunate for that. So, I was lucky in that I haven't had too many, like, by like the world standards, like terrible hardships. But I think, a couple injuries and kind of taking that like control what you can control and control your response kind of approach had always been helpful.
Love it. From your answers from Matt to Kyle, to that moment in Israel, and then the college essay, regardless of whether it was good or not, there's an idea that comes to mind. It's not what you get from it, but it's who you become by it. And I think that was just great for all of your answers right there, whether it was learning from those guys or your highlight or your hardship. There's just something called The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. It's this idea that you go on an adventure, you cross a threshold of what you already know into an unknown world, you find some help, you go through a kind of trials and tribulations, and you come back into the known world as the same person with a different perspective. So I think that's what you showed me, like a little hero's journey going on there from the college essay. And I feel like the same way, when I was a senior in high school, kind of during that recruiting time too, I broke my back, and it gave me a whole different perspective. And I think, every breakdown leads to a breakthrough. I mean, it's really hard to see that in the moment. You brought up, if there's somebody that goes through a season injury, you should mourn that, right? But it's about closing that gap of how long you mourn, I believe. And then it's just recovering from there. Flipping the script into a little bit more lighthearted of a speed round. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions right in a row, just so people can get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready?
I'm ready, but before we start, I just have to acknowledge, like, you are just a machine with the quotes, the books. Like, you are just, it's impressive. Like, you just got them ready to roll. It's almost as if like you told me what to say and you had a response ready. I'm impressed. So I do want to acknowledge that. And now I'm ready for the speed round, where I'm sure I'll overthink all these answers and like ruin the flow of it. Just a heads up, but I'm ready.
Be a stoic about it. Okay. Your favorite music band?
Favorite music band at the moment is Alice in Chains.
I knew you weren't that like everyday. What's the latest top hit? Favorite movie?
Good Will Hunting.
Nice. Favorite food?
Lobster.
Nice. Favorite hobby outside of sport?
I've been liking the outdoors, like hiking.
Nice.
I've had like those big trips. Like, I've really enjoyed them. So,
speaking of trips, that's my next question. Favorite place you've ever traveled to?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I'm gonna do a few. Sorry,
That's
the
okay.
speed round is slowing down.
It's slowing down.
We went over to Yosemite this past summer after the bubble, and it was incredible. It was kind of a close group of friends and just like a really cool, like outdoorsy, like camaraderie sort of trip, and it was awesome. Hawaii is beautiful, same sort of thing, like just more so the crew of people. And Uganda is like one of my favorite places I've ever been. Like, that's a throwback. It's been, I think 10 years, maybe more. Well, probably around there, but just like an incredibly like beautiful place with like incredible people. So I would go with those three, but I could go on and on about travel.
No, I'm happy you slowed it down.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. The last one I'll say is your favorite sports team outside of lacrosse.
Islanders.
Nice.
Yeah, those are. I don't know anything about hockey. I like watching it, but their home arena, at least until now, was in pretty much my hometown. So, and they're like Long Island's team, which I like. I like to separate like New York Islanders with the name. I like that they're Long Island, whereas all other teams are like New York. Like, it felt cool and local. So those are my guys.
That's great. I love that you don't know anything about hockey. That's great. When you're training aspiring young student athletes, at your charity events that you do, your large clinics, or maybe even in your like a individual or small group sessions, and we're in the home stretch here, the fourth quarter of this podcast, what message do you find yourself constantly repeating to those younger individuals the most? Is there Speaking of quotes, are there any quotes, that phrases, sayings, and messages that you reinforce to these guys on a consistent basis, guys and gals?
Um, I would say lacrosse wise, like it just snap your wrist. Like I say that 1,000 times an hour. Like get your wrist going, like loosen up your grip and like you snap your wrist.
It's crazy you say that, because when I am doing a lacrosse training session, I'll say snap your wrist like Tom Schreiber, because I don't know many that do, right? It's more catapult, long, all the way arms
yeah.
back.
Yeah. I mean, I've like, it's ad nauseum at this point. Like the kids, like, definitely give me, make fun of me a little bit for it. But like, that's definitely what I say the most. I'd say like the more like sage, like wisdom that I would pass on, and I know we've like hit on this a number of times, but the stoicism stuff, like some of like the college kids that like I'm still tight with, that I'll talk to on the phone for 45 minutes. Like I would say I don't say a ton of that stuff like in like an hour long training session, but if I'm really getting into like mindset and things with guys, like there's this like corny like YouTube video. It's I can't even remember which philosopher it is, but it's like called The Chinese Farmer. And it's just about like this series of, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Like, I think it's just like, it's really simple, but it's really useful, especially like for guys that go through an injury or, had it like a bad stretch of games, or like got shut out of a game, or like had something happen to them. Like, the gist of it is just like there's a series of events that happen, like good and bad, and like the guy's reaction is like, oh, that's great, or oh, that's terrible, and his response is just like, oh, maybe, and it's all about how you react and what happens next. So I would say that's one I've sent around a lot, just because it's easy to digest and it takes about 3 minutes of your time.
Oh yeah.
So that's what I would go with.
Do you mind if I do that story to the best of my ability right now? I'm going to go for it. Let's do it.
Go ahead.
All right. So there's this Chinese farmer that has this beautiful white horse show up at his doorstep, and he puts it in the backyard. And all his friends from town come and say, you're so lucky. What an amazing white horse. You should be so proud. And he said, good or bad, we shall see. And the very next morning he wakes up and the horse is gone. And his friends from town come and he goes, oh, so devastating that you lost such a beautiful white horse. And he says, good or bad, we shall see. And the very next day, that white horse jumps over the fence with 7 other beautiful wild horses. So now he's got 8 beautiful wild horses in his backyard, and his friends from town come up and they say, what are you doing to get so lucky? What beautiful horses you have. He says, good or bad, we shall see. And the farmer's son goes out onto one of the wild horses, and he's riding it around, and he falls off and breaks both of his legs. His friends from town come up, and he says, if there's anything we can do, I'm so sorry that happened to your son. What an unfortunate event. And the Chinese farmer says, good or bad, we shall see. And the very next day, since China was going through a civil war, many of the recruiters showed up at the house, and they were looking for any able young men. And seeing the boy laid up with 2 broken legs, they said he's not fit for service, and left. The friends from town come up and say, all our boys were taken away, but you got so lucky with your son that he's injured at this time. And what do you think? He said, good or bad, we shall see. I had to do that because that's one of my favorite stories. And Can we just confirm something, Tom, that I did not send you the questions prior?
No, I feel like it's people are gonna think this is all scripted now. Like you're too on the ball. I already said it before. Like
Tom, my next question after asking you the messages was, since this podcast revolves around performance, what percentage out of 100 do you believe that the game was mental? Now, I want you to answer that, but you already said that most of your messages around stoic and mindset.
Yeah, and the other one, ironically, like the 2 things I send around are that clip, and I'm sure you've read this one. I originally got it. I was real young, from the Pomper family, who played at UVA, and I think it's a Dom Starsia recommendation originally, but it's called Mind Gym. it's a sports psychologist named Gary Mack. And they do a lot of baseball and golf stuff in it. But the way they kind of like rope you in is they ask that exact question, like what percentage of the game is mental, what percentage of the game is physical. And there's not, there's no like correct answer, but like at the end of the day, people are like, 50-50, 75-25, like whatever it is. And then the follow-up is like, well, what percentage of your preparation is physical versus what percentage of it is mental? And that balance is almost never, on par with the, percentage of the game. So I think that stuff's important. Obviously, I think like the mental approach is really important, and kind of having like a solid foundation of, values, principles, whatever it is like that you need to perform. And I think like having a plan, and knowing how to react, especially like at the higher levels, we talked about like college lacrosse, like at times really sucks. And like, if you're not prepared for that, you're probably going to crumble. And I think we probably all know like top 20 recruits that just like didn't pan out, or like, oh, whatever happened to that guy. And it's like, it's really hard. And like, you see guys kind of emerge out of nowhere, like we had walk-ons on our team end up being captains at Princeton, and like we're some of the best leaders, and we're just like mentally like really, really strong, and we're great. And I think like, there's so many things at play, but I think like having a mental plan and being kind of on the ball there is something that's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. Who comes to mind for me is a really great friend of mine, James Jarkson. At Yale, he was a walk-on, but played defensive midfielder with me, and he's one of my best friends to this day. And whether he's a stoic or not, he acted like one. He's one of the toughest guys I know. When I was in college, I had a mental coach come my junior year, and he did this thing. He was like, sit down if you think the game is 50% mental or less. And long story short, I'm the only one still standing when he's up to 98%. 6 years later, I'm teaching the mental game, but he was kind of blown away that I was still standing there. And I just said, when talent's equal, it's all going to come down to mental preparation, And then the first book I've ever read in mental training was Gary Mack's Mind Gym. And the one quote I'll say from it, because I have one for everything, is the probability of the outcome you want increases when you let go of the need to have it. So it has everything to do. If you want to win, you got to focus on the process. 3 last questions, and then I'll let you go. When you were younger, was it always an aspiration to play at the highest level, or did that kind of not materialize and become a goal until you were middle school, high school?
So it's funny you say that quote, because it definitely ties back in yet again, like making this look like a scripted podcast. Yeah, so I'm like, to start, like I'm like very, like I lived like a very like lacrosse existence. Like I think I'm one of the few that like always wanted to be a professional lacrosse player. I was just around it a lot. Like I said, I grew up by the Nassau Coliseum where the Islanders played. New York Saints played there. The Lizards played at Hofstra and at Mitchell Field. Both are within 10 minutes of my childhood home. So I was just around the game a lot. My uncle refed like a lot of the Lizards games, so I was like always running around the sidelines. I definitely like handed out some water to some of those guys for a while, and I just like had a ton of like role models, right from the beginning. And if I wasn't at one of those games, I was at one of my practices. And my dad coached this team that had like the Brattons on it, and Zach Howell and all these other like, legendary. Adam Gittleman was the goalie, I was at that time, it feels like an eternity. I'm probably 7-8 years, maybe less, younger than those guys. But when I'm, 7 years old and they're 14, like it felt like an eternity. So I always like had these like lacrosse role models and like a lot of people to aspire to be. So I always wanted to play at a really high level. That was kind of always the plan. And my dad was a big part of that. My cousin Scott was a big part of that. And I always loved it too, which I think is really important. I think you have to kind of love this thing. And if you don't, it's just like do something else. Cause like we keep saying, it gets really difficult at times. And if you don't love it at the end of the day, it's really hard to get through. But I think, going back to that quote, I think for a long, long time, because I wanted to be like a great lacrosse player and play at a high level, like I remember like wanting to like accomplish all of these things. And I remember my dad, this is like one of the only pieces of advice that he gave me that like didn't work for me. Was so he won like the version of the Tewarton was just like the national player of the year in 1973. And the guy who won it the year before, he like put up a picture of him on his wall and as motivation for him. And like he always was like kind of preaching stuff like that. And sure enough, like I find myself in that position a few years later, like when like these stupid like Inside Lacrosse like recruiting rankings come out, and the first time that they came out, like they rank you like 3 different times before you go to college, and I think I was like 5, 4, and then 2, and like instead of being happy or anything like that, I was like fuming that I was 2 and not 1, and like my dad would just like put those things up all the time, be like, oh, like these guys are ahead of you, like you got to like get more out of it. And it would just like drive me crazy. And it worked, but as time went on, like I think it became so much less about all of these like these like results and more just about like the process itself. Because like then fast forward a few years later, like I was the first pick in the draft, and that was like I remember my dad thinking like, oh, this is like the full circle, like this is so cool that like we went 5, 4, 2, and then now you're 1, like you did it. And I felt like nothing. So I was like, oh, like, well, we did this, and okay, well, my first game's in a week, so now I have to get ready for that. And so that was like pretty eye-opening. And as great as like that world championship was, like it's like an amazing moment in my life, but like nothing really changed after. What I mean? Like it was amazing for that day, but like it didn't, like I didn't feel like, oh, I'm like complete. Like you just kind of move on to the next thing. So it was pretty, you hear like the processed product stuff all the time, but like I would say if you could really embrace that, I think it's like a very, very powerful thing, because at the end of the day, it's just like the world keeps turning and the next thing is going to happen. So like regardless of you win this, you lose that, like it's all, again, it just goes back to how you're spending the majority of your time and what you're getting out of it. And I think it ties back into that mental piece too, like what's driving you and why you're doing it. And I think like figuring that stuff out and your day to day is much more important and much more fulfilling than winning something or accomplishing something.
I didn't even hear it until recently, but the idea of improve versus prove, I was like, whoa, that kind of really resonates with me. I read Why Men Win Glory, Where Men Win Glory, by a book about Pat Tillman. Saw that he ran a marathon. I was like, I got to run a marathon. I run the New York City Marathon. I was training all these months for it, and I crossed the finish line, and I'm like, depressed at that moment. I'm like, whoa, what was going on here? And it's because we're all activated by having an aim rather than attainment, or because then the whole game ends. Okay, you're number 1, Tom. Now what, right? And it's that whole idea. It's said about actors and pro athletes, if you literally want to be anything else, go do that. Right? Because that goes hand in hand with what you said about love. Do you love it, right? Do you love this even when it gets really difficult? And one little side note is, I was a water boy at St. Joe's Regional here in New Jersey for the McCourty brothers. And they were always so kind. These water bottles, I remember them. They were like, they weighed more than me at the time. They were always so kind. They said thank you. They tapped me on the head. There's something about being a water boy that makes you love the game at a very young age. So I would say if you could throw yourself or your kids into water boy, they have somebody to look up to.
Yeah, well, and those 2 brothers you just mentioned, like they definitely don't remember doing that, but like it had an impact on you.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that stuff is very cool, like especially in our position now. Like like you could be walking off the floor in San Diego and like you give a kid a high five and it could like make their day. And like it's so funny seeing like we do like these PLL Academy things, and these like the fans, the Premier Zone, like and sign autographs and stuff, and it's like sometimes you're just like, oh man, like do these guys even like know who I am? Like, is this even cool? Like, what am I doing here? And but for every 10 of those where it's like the kid has no idea who you are, they just want like a signature. Like, there's one of them, whether you realize it or not, that like it's very cool for them, and it's like a wild position to be in, because I still feel like that water boy too. I'm still like, oh wow, Kyle Harrison, like. But like it's crazy having that kind of influence and seeing it, and like in our world, like if we're coaching or something and see a kid improve, and seeing that like quiet like dedication is like really, really cool.
That's so rewarding. I was down doing a Premier Lacrosse League Academy clinic in Pennsylvania, and one of these kids comes up to me, like cheeks popping through the face mask type of thing, and he goes, "Did you teach the game in Japan?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I know you did because I researched you." But it's like just having that one person, that really, really cares and was looking forward to it. Last two things here, Tom. If I was a complete stranger and asked you for like a 30-second elevator speech as to what you would attest you becoming such a great lacrosse player, what would be your short and sweet answer to that?
I think constantly learning. Never really feeling like you're at the end, and like continuing to strive to get better. And, like I was saying before, continuing to try to add new layers, and having a purpose for why you're doing it, and I think at the end of the day, like for me, it was, being motivated by, just improving, and being motivated by like other guys also doing the work. Like I know like my teammates are also working really hard, and like I want to live up to that standard, and like I want to repay like those people who have like done so much for me, and like even at this point in my life, like my wife like lets me like play lacrosse every weekend, and like be a pro lacrosse player and do all this stuff, and like sometimes it's like making me protein shakes and like helping me out and things like that. Like I you feel like an obligation to repay that and do it at the highest level. So I'm sure that wasn't 30 seconds. I'm sure that wasn't great for a stranger, but that's what came to mind. And those are like pretty important things for me personally. And by the way, with all this stuff, it's like I'm far from perfect. I'm far from like having everything together and like being like living all of this stuff. I know what to do. Like I still have a ton of work to do, and I'm far from like some like monk when something bad happens. Like I'm still losing my mind on the field from time to time, and it's all like we keep saying, it's all the process of trying to correct this stuff and continue to kind of grow. But again, I've exceeded my 30 seconds.
Nah, way beyond 30
this
seconds.
toward a stranger.
I'm so happy. That just goes to show you didn't get the questions in front because you didn't prepare. But yeah, I have a quote for everything, and what I would say is, be present, not perfect. We have this ideal of who we want to be and how we want to live our life, but being present is half the battle. Monks dedicate their whole life to trying to do it, so it's a hard thing to do. That's the grateful side of this. A last question. I finished the episode the same way. So Tom, regardless of the sport, field, or profession, what does greatness look like to you? In your opinion, how would you define greatness?
Difficult question. I mean, I would say I don't think about it all that often. I think like I used to, and I probably used to say like, championships and, MVPs and things like that. I think at this point I know it sounds like corny and whatnot, but it's like helping your team at any cost, I think is greatness. And I think it's funny that this coincides with the NCAA tournament. I feel like every year you watch these championship teams and there's some guy who's like, he's had his second goal of the game and it's like, oh, that's his fifth goal of the season. And it's like, the quarterfinals with the game on the line, like you always we saw it yesterday.
Right.
I can't point to who it was, but like I was watching the games and I was watching one of my cousins. He was like, "Oh wow, it's only his fifth goal." Or fourth goal or something. I was like, there are always these guys, and like more times than not, I'll show you some of like their D middies, like the most like thankless job in the world. It's like some guy making a play like that, and at the end of the day, like that's like the greatness. Like that's on a micro scale. Like you look at like our team with the Archers, like we have so many guys who do these things that don't show up. Like I get like all this glory, but like, if Ryan Ambler doesn't like draw a slide, and move the ball one more and somebody else moves it and then I get to like go and shoot it, then that doesn't happen. If like Matt McMahon or Rat or somebody doesn't take the ball off somebody and like we go down the field and we get to score, like that stuff doesn't happen. So I think like, I think at this point it's just selflessness. I think like is a premium, not just in sports but in the world now. Like I could write you a dissertation on how social media is just like eroding our culture, but I think like actual selflessness where guys don't expect anything in return in sports and just do it because it's the best thing for the team. That's probably how I would define it right now. And I think like that's what defines a great team.
Yeah, and I think that sums you up, Tom, in a lot of ways. And I mean that, championships, MVPs, yeah, they're definitely there, but selflessness first and foremost. Thank you so much for coming on. This didn't feel like a networking event. It felt more than that. Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.